This building, built in 1735, was the retail business and home of William Munroe IV and his family. Munroe purchased the property in 1770 and obtained a tavern keeper's license in 1774. The tavern was located on the main road from Cambridge to Concord. William was married to the former Anna Smith, and they'd had 3 children by April 1775. William Munroe was a member of the Lexington militia. The Munroes were one of Lexington's older families. The first William Munroe was a Scottish soldier who was captured and sent in 1652 to the North American colonies as an indentured servant. He settled in what was then called Cambridge Farms and later became Lexington. By the time of his great-grandson William IV, the Munroes were a large and prosperous family. 8 of the Munroes were on Lexington Common that day during the confrontation with the King's troops. In the afternoon of April 19, 1775, as the British troops were returning from Concord and the reinforcements led by Earl Percy were approaching, Mrs. Munroe and her 3 children fled from the house into the woods. Earl Percy then requisitioned Munroe Tavern as a field hospital for about an hour and a half to give the troops time to rest and perform surgery on the wounded. Because this building has a more direct connection with the King's troops, otherwise known as the regulars, we have chosen to present here the other side of that day's events, as experienced by the British soldiers. 14 years after the Battle of Lexington, Munroe Tavern made history again, as President George Washington's dinner destination during his visit to Lexington in 1789. The 4 rooms in the front of the building, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, date back to 1735. The current entrance room, facing the Colonial Flower Garden, dates to 1770, likely built by William IV as an expansion after his and Anna's move here. Around 1850, after the opening of the train line from Boston, travel was made easier and faster, and the tavern was closed. However, the house stayed in the family until 1911, when it was bequeathed to the Lexington Historical Society. Orientation Room. Welcome to our Orientation Room, displaying a map and timeline encompassing the events of April 18th and 19th, 1775, and the march of the British soldiers to Lexington, Concord, and back. These events began an armed revolt which grew into the American Revolution. The march of the soldiers is shown by colored lines. Red. The advance of 700 British soldiers to Lexington and Concord, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith. Black. Smith's retreat from Concord to Lexington. Gray. The path taken to Lexington by Earl Percy's relief column. Black and gray. The retreat from Lexington to Charlestown of the combined column of soldiers. Please take note of the pocket watch images to track the time of various events. Begin at 10 p.m. on April 18th, 1775, as 21 companies of light infantry and grenadiers, about 700 men, are ferried across Back Bay to a marshy shore in Cambridge. At about 1 a.m., a patrol of British officers captures Paul Revere on the road from Lexington to Concord. Revere has been spreading word of the march and tells the officers of armed militia gathering on Lexington Common. At about 5 a.m., 6 companies of light infantry, sent ahead by Colonel Smith and led by Major John Pitcairn, encounter about 80 men of the Lexington militia on the Common. Harsh words are exchanged, shots are fired, and several militiamen are killed. The remainder of the British force arrives. Order is restored by Colonel Smith, and the column departs for Concord by 6 a.m., arriving in Concord by 8 a.m. Colonel Smith sends companies to guard the south and north bridges, and others further to the Barrett farmhouse beyond North Bridge, searching for cannon. Near 10 a.m., militia from surrounding towns, seeing smoke rising from Concord, attack the soldiers at North Bridge, killing several. By 12 noon, the British column has begun its retreat, but is repeatedly attacked by militia forces along the road. By 2 p.m., the battered column reaches Lexington and, near Munroe Tavern, meets reinforcements led by Earl Percy. They rest and recuperate in and around the tavern, firing 2 cannon to keep the militia at a distance. By 4 p.m., the combined British force is again on the march through Monotony, where intense fighting occurred, and finally reaches safety in Charlestown by evening. Please also take note at the right side of the mural, small portraits of 4 British officers notable in the day's events. General Thomas Gage, instructed by London to strike against a growing rebellion, orders 700 soldiers to march from Boston to Concord to destroy arms and supplies stored there by the Committee of Safety. His actions provoke the very war he is trying to avoid. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith of the 10th Regiment of Foot, commanding the expedition, realizes in the early morning hours that secrecy has been lost. He orders riders back to Boston, calling for reinforcements, and orders 6 light infantry companies forward at a quick pace to seize 2 bridges just west of Concord. Major John Pitcairn, in command of the 6 companies, encountered a large company of armed militia on the Lexington Common. Harsh words were exchanged, and a shot is fired, triggering a deadly skirmish. Hugh, Earl Percy, colonel of the 5th Regiment of Foot, leads a column of 1,200 soldiers as a relief force. Leaving Boston the morning of April 19th, they meet Smith's column, battered by numerous attacks, on the road near Munroe Tavern. Percy Room. Lieutenant Colonel Smith's troops, returning from Concord, were exhausted, hungry, and thirsty, and the wounded needed to be tended. Earl Percy's choice of this tavern was logical, as it provided temporary shelter, food and drink, and clean linens for bandages to help dress wounds. Munroe Tavern also provided a secure location near a hill, with wide views all around to the main road. Earl Percy's troops, coming from Boston, included surgeons and surgeons' mates. This parlor room would have witnessed the frantic work of military surgeons dressing awful wounds as quickly as possible, so these soldiers could return to the terrible march ahead of them. In the 18th century, surgery was done without anesthetic, and sanitation was unknown. The outcome of surgery often led to amputation. Musket balls were removed with a pair of pliers, and knives were not disinfected. Jeremy Lister was an ensign in the 10th Regiment of Foot. He was a volunteer in Smith's detachment, having taken the place of another officer who claimed to be ill. Lister's elbow was shattered during the exchange at Merriam's Corner. Surgeon's mate Sims cut a bullet out of his elbow at Munroe Tavern, while Lister nearly fainted from pain and loss of blood. The medicine chest, displayed in the linen closet, was owned by William's brother Edmund. Note the bottles of medicinal herbs, like those that Percy's surgeons would have used to help treat the wounded king's troops. Both the 5th and the 38th regiments were present in Lexington that day. Mannequins for 2 British officers are shown here planning their return route to Boston. They are wearing scarlet-red coats, which are easily distinguishable from those of enlisted men, who wore darker color coats. Each officer wore an engraved metal gorget, a remnant of the medieval suit of armor. The gorget around their neck, as well as their sashes and swords, identified them as British Army officers. One of the mannequins represents an officer in a light infantry regiment. The other is a grenadier. Grenadiers were tall, and the bearskin caps they wore made them look even taller and more impressive. They were thus named because they used to throw grenades. Tap room. William Munroe IV was licensed to open this tavern in October 1774. Taverns were an important part of colonial society. They supported travelers by providing overnight room and board and a place to rest their animals. They supported town residents by providing meeting spaces, entertainment, news, and prepared meals. Tavern owners had to get relicensed each year in order to serve alcohol on the premises. Munroe also ran a retail shop from this building. His original account books show residents purchasing food, household goods, tools, and lumber. The original Munroe Tavern sign displayed in this room is typical of that period. Tavern keepers were required to display one prominently outside their establishments, usually near the road. On this sign, below Entertainment at the top, is the faded image of a punch bowl. At the bottom is the name, Munroe. Note the pale lettering, barely visible beneath the top relettering, where the Munroe name is spelled without the E at the end. Families could change the spellings of their name over time. By April of 1775, Munroe was orderly sergeant for Captain Parker's Lexington Militia Company. His duties kept him away from the house the evening before the Battle of Lexington, guarding Sam Adams and John Hancock at the Hancock-Clark House. He was absent all the next day with his fellow militiamen. William was one of 8 Munroe men from this extended family on the Common the morning of April 19th. 2 Munroes died as a result of the battle. His young wife, Anna, and their 3 little children of 7, 4, and 18 months old were home during the battle. On April 19th, 1775, as the King's troops were getting closer to the Munroe property, Anna, along with her children, William, Anna, and Sally, sought refuge in the nearby woods. Her neighbor, John Raymond, had come over to help. After the King's troops left, they found his body lying dead outside the tavern, the final Lexington casualty of the day. Upon returning home at the end of the day on April 19th, the Munroes reported several things awry. For example, they found this bullet hole here in their taproom ceiling. Did a redcoat musket go off by accident? Did a soldier fire deliberately into the room? We will never know for sure. The Munroes decided to keep this little patch of original ceiling material, with its bullet hole, to commemorate the calamitous events of the day. Munroe Family Room. Most of the time, the second floor would have only been seen by family members and very close friends. Strangers would not normally explore these chambers. The many Munroe-owned objects in this room bring alive numerous family tales. The portrait of Anna Munroe was captured when Anna was in her 70s. Anna married a local boy, William Muzzy, and moved to New Hampshire to raise their family. But she returned to Lexington for her elder years. Thanks to Anna, we are in possession of many artifacts that belonged to the Munroe family. Belonging to Anna Munroe is her spinning wheel. Flax wheels like this would have been common in most colonial homes during the Revolutionary period. Through providing first-hand accounts from a woman's perspective to her own daughter and granddaughter, Laura Muzzy Brigham, Anna ensured that the legacy of her ancestors was passed on for future generations. For example, the trunk belonging to Lucinda Munroe. Lucinda, the third and youngest Munroe daughter, was born after 1775. The Winship sampler on display in this room speaks volumes of the intricate connections that bound the Munroe family to the fabric of history. This beautiful family register in the Tree of Life pattern was stitched in 1812 by 18-year-old Lucebia Winship, granddaughter of Anna Munroe and Daniel Harrington. Her grandmother, Anna, was cousin to William Munroe, Munroe Tavern proprietor. Lucebia's great-grandfather, Robert Munroe, was one of the 8 Lexington militiamen killed on the Common the morning of April 19th. Lucebia's uncle, Levi Harrington, shown in her sampler, was a 14-year-old witness in 1775, who left us his deposition of what he experienced that morning. The wallpaper that surrounds this room has been reproduced from fragments dated around 1765, discovered in West Street, St. Mary's City, Maryland. The wallpaper design borrowed heavily from textile motifs, as was often the case during this period of the 18th century. Cross-hatching inside S-scroll ribbons gives the appearance of lace. The coloring of the paper is also typical of the period. Stone colors with heavy reliance on black, white, and gray were standard in England, despite the availability of brighter colors. Washington Room. George Washington, inaugurated as our first president in April of 1789, resolved to travel through each of the new United States. His aim was both to gauge the mood of the people as well as to rally their support for our new national government. He began his trip in the North, possibly to ease any concerns the people may have had about a Virginian holding the highest position in the government. To avoid any appearance of favoritism, he and his small entourage would both eat and sleep only in taverns. On the 5th of November, his journey brought him to Lexington. He was to have visited in October, but illness kept him in Boston longer than anticipated. Fortunately, his route on his return trip from a visit to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, allowed him to view the spot on which the first blood was spilt in the dispute with Great Britain. After his visit to Lexington Green, he stopped at Munroe Tavern for a meal. This room would have been a family bedroom in 1789, but it was transformed into a dining room for the president's visit. 18-year-old Anna Munroe brought the food upstairs, while 16-year-old Sister Sally helped serve. After the tables were cleared and the dishes washed, the ones used by Washington were set aside to be preserved as mementos of his visit. Many amusing stories survive from the Munroe girls about their handling of Washington's dishes and the remainder of the feast. Several of these items are on display in the case in the corridor. Most of the furnishings in this room are original to the house. The red ladder-back armchair next to the dining table is the one in which the president sat while dining. Of all the artifacts kept by the Munroes down through the generations, this was perhaps their most honored. Laura Muzzy Brigham, granddaughter of Anna Munroe and William Muzzy, recalled being placed in the chair as a child, and warned that she could never tell a lie after sitting in that chair. The Hepplewhite desk belonged to our tavern keeper and demonstrates his increased affluence throughout his life. The portrait above it is of William Munroe, painted in 1813. The other portrait in the room is of his father, and is said to have been damaged by the king's troops when they occupied the tavern. The triangle shape of the hat box on the side table, also called a bandbox, indicates it would have been used for a gentleman's cocked hat, or tricorn. The wallpaper displayed here is a reproduction of paper found in the home of Jonathan Sayward in York, Maine. Washington display case. George Washington was commemorated both during his life and after his death on December 14, 1799, as shown by the items in this case. The small teacup and spoon were used by him, as was the pewter plate. They were among the things preserved and cherished by the Munroe family. The large metal staple was attached to a tree near the tavern. Because Washington tied his horse to it, the family saved it too.